Welcome to the video for Chapter 10 of the Cambridge Introduction to Sanskrit, which is going to tell you about prepositions and preverbs. As was mentioned in Chapter 5, prepositions in Sanskrit should strictly speaking be called postpositions and not prepositions, because they are little words put post, i.e. following a noun. They indicate the function that this noun has in a sentence, and the by far most frequent prepositions or postpositions in Sanskrit are prati, saha, and vina. Prati is used together with nouns in the accusative to mean towards. Nagaram prati would be towards the city. Saha is used together with nouns in the instrumental case and means with. Mitraich saha would be together with one's friends. And vina can be used with nouns in the instrumental or the accusative or the ablative to mean without. So, for example, you might have bhayena, instrumental, bhayan, accusative, or bhayat, ablative vina, to mean without fear. The rest of this chapter, though, is going to focus on preverbs, which are added pre, i.e. to the front of a verb, and they affect the overall meaning of the verb, sometimes noticeably, sometimes not. A verb that has a preverb is called a compound verb. And to look at a couple of examples of such compound verbs, there is apa, which is a preverb meaning away or off, which gives us forms such as apagacchati, meaning he goes away or he departs. A, another preverb meaning in this direction or slightly more archaically hither, which gives us forms such as agacchati, meaning he comes. Gacchati means he goes, agacchati, he goes in this direction, he goes hither, i.e. he comes. Or for example prati, which when it's used as a preverb can either mean towards or also back to. So purang prati gacchati means either he goes towards the city, he approaches the city, or potentially also he goes back to the city. There are 5 things to note about preverbs, and we're going to go through them one by one now. First of all, preverbs cannot always be translated into English. The more general the meaning of a verb is, the more likely its English translation will be affected by the preverb or by the preverbs. But if the basic verb already has a fairly specific meaning, then that meaning will be affected only rather lightly, and perhaps in a way that you cannot translate, or at least not translate literally, into English. So, for example, a fairly general verb, such as gam, to go, can be combined with all sorts of preverbs in a way that then changes the meaning of the basic verb and that changes the English translation. So, for example, we have anugam, meaning to literally go after or to follow. We have apagam, to go away. Samgam, to go together, i.e. to come together, to assemble, and so on. If you look at a verb such as much, to release, on the other hand, there's a number of combinations of preverbs with this verb, such as awamuch, udmuch, nirmuch, parimuch, pramuch, that all are basically to release in English. The reason why we have these different compound verbs, these different combinations of preverb plus much, though, is because some of these verbs will have slightly differing usages. So awamuch, which basically means still to release, can be used specifically to mean releasing one's clothing, and there we would then use a completely different translation in English. We would say taking off one's clothing. Another example, pramuch, can just again mean to release, but it can specifically refer to fruit being released from their tree, and that again we wouldn't translate literally, but we would translate it quite differently, namely as fruit falling from a tree. Secondly, verbs can have 2 or more rarely even 3 preverbs. So for example, again, gam, to go. Agam is to go hither, to come. Parigam would be to go around or to reach something. Pari-agam would be to arrive at or to reach one's goal. Pari-upa-agam, quite rare, would mean to surround something. Number 3, while the meaning of a compound verb can frequently be predicted from the meaning of the compound verb's parts, so the preverbs and the verb itself, this meaning often can also not be predicted. For example, it may be slightly difficult to arrive at the meaning of to surround just by looking at the elements of pari, upa, a, and gam, so to go around, towards, and hither. Similarly, to understand is something or is a meaning that you probably wouldn't be able to arrive at just by looking at the components of awa, gam, which are awa, meaning down or off, and gam, to go. So if neither translating just the basic verb, nor combining the literal meaning of the verb with that of the preverbs works is enough to figure out the meaning of the compound verb as a whole, you will have to look up the compound verb in a dictionary or word list. On to a formal aspect concerning preverbs, number 4. Sometimes the verb causes internal sandhi. For example, you may find retroflexion of s or n to sh or n. So, for example, in pra nam, to bow forwards or simply to bow, we have a third person singular pra namati with the n having changed into a retroflex n after the r in pra. So pra namati, not pranamati. And in, for example, upa ni sad, to sit near or to sit facing someone, where the normal present tense of sad would be sidati, here we have a change of the s to a retroflex sh after the I contained in upa ni sad, and so we have a present tense upa ni shidati. Sometimes we may also find devoicing, so for example of ud sta, to stand up, where the present tense of sta is tishtati, we find the d, devoicing, losing its voice, in front of the unvoiced stop t. So instead of ud tishtati, we have ut tishtati. The important thing here is to be able to recognize the sandhi so that you can identify the basic verb that you're looking at. Being able to split up compound verbs into their parts, so into preverbs and the verb itself, is particularly important because 5. In many dictionaries, and also in this book, compound verbs are listed under the verbal root. So, for example, if you're trying to figure out what a form such as san gacchanti means, then you need to be able to realize that san is the preverb sam, which has been sandhied into san, and that the verb form itself is gacchanti, and gacchanti can be found in the entry for its root, gam, and there you then have to look for a sub-entry on the particular compound verb, sam, gam. Same with pranamati. You need to be able to realize that pra is a preverb, namati actually is the sandhied form of namati, and therefore you need to look for the entry for nam, and in that you need to look for a sub-entry on pra, nam. Same exact thing with upa ni shidati. You need to be able to recognize that upa and ni are preverbs, and that shidati is the sandhied form of sidati, present tense of sad, and therefore if you want to look up what upa ni shidati means, you need to look in the entry for sad, and there in a sub-entry upa ni sad. For the most part, compound verbs behave exactly like normal, like simple verbs. They form their present tense in the same way, they form their future in the same way, and so on. However, absolutives of compound verbs are formed slightly differently from absolutives of simple verbs, because, if you remember, simple verbs form their absolutives by taking the zero-grade root and adding twa. Compound verbs, on the other hand, take the zero-grade root and add tya if the root ends in a short vowel, or ya if the root ends in anything else. So, for example, of dru, to run, we have an absolutive dru twa, having run, but of apadru, to run away, we have an absolutive apadru tya. So we've got the preverb apa, the root in zero grade, dru, and then the suffix tya. Similarly with ni, to lead, we have the absolutive ni twa, having led, but of the compound verb apa ni, we have an absolutive apa niya, because here we have a compound verb, and in this case we have a compound verb whose root ends in a long vowel, i, and therefore we don't add tya, but instead we add ya. In compound verbs, we have many chances for internal sandhi to occur because there are just so many things being combined here, preverbs, verbal roots, verbal endings. And because that's the case, it makes sense to review internal sandhi here a little bit and specifically look at the internal sandhi involving vowels and nasals. For example, if you have a vowel encountering an identical vowel, they combine into a long vowel. So for example, a or a plus a or a give us long a. I or I plus I or I give us long I. And the same with u or u plus u or u give us long u. So for example, upa a ni, meaning to bring or to fetch, has a third person singular upa nayati. What we've got here is upa plus a, the a of upa and the a meeting and merging into a long vowel, and therefore from upa plus a we get upa. And the third singular then is upa nayati, he brings. If we have an I or an U or U meeting a vowel other than themselves, they turn into Y or W respectively, i.e. they turn into their semi-vowel counterparts. For example, we appa ni, to lead away, has a third singular wiappa nayati, where the I of we in front of the a of appa doesn't remain as it is, but it changes into a y, and so we don't have we appa, but we have wiappa. And in adi agam, meaning to come upon or to find something, we have a third person singular adya gacchati, where the adhi, the I in the adi, has changed into a y in front of the a, and so we don't get adi a, but we get adya. If, on the other hand, an a or a meet a vowel other than a or a, they merge to form a new vowel. Namely, if a or a meets I or I, they turn into e, and if a or a meet u or u, they turn into o. What's happening here is something that we've mentioned several times already, namely that the complex vowels e, I, o, au originally were I, au, au, and therefore when we have an a meeting an I, we don't get I as the result, but I changes into e. And if we have an a meeting an u, then the result isn't au, but rather it's an au that changes into o. And so, for example, of pra, ud, dr, meaning to raise, we have a third singular prod dharayati, where pra and ud have merged, but not into proud, or rather, originally it was an au, but this au has changed into an o, and so pra ud then becomes prod. An M in preverbs remains as an M if a vowel follows, but turns into an anuswara, so un, before another consonant. This is basically exactly like what we've seen happening at the ends of words. So if an M stands at the end of a word, it remains as an M if the next word begins with a vowel, but it changes into an anuswara if the next word begins with a consonant. Same thing happens inside words. So for example, if I have sam a gam, then the third plural of that will be sam a gachanti. But sam gam has the sam, the M, just before another consonant, namely the g, and so the third person plural of that will be san gachanti. The main thing for you to do in this chapter is to memorize the list of preverbs that you find in the book, but also on here, starting from ati, adhi, anu, going via antar, appa, api, abhi, awa, a, ud, upa, ni, to nis, pari, pra, prati, we, and sam. Now, memorizing this list of preverbs is probably easier said than done, given that preverbs are all short, all sound similar, and thus are quite simply difficult to memorize. However, maybe a few tricks might help. For example, adi, api, abhi, anu, and upa all have similar functions. They all express a motion towards something. So perhaps rather than memorizing each of them individually, try and remember that adi, api, abhi, and anu and upa all express a motion towards. Some preverbs you may be able to recognize more easily via Latin and Greek preverbs that have been borrowed into English words. For example, antar, meaning between, is related to inter in words such as international, meaning among or between nations. Pra, meaning forward, is related to pra or pro in words such as progress, i.e. movement forward. Pari, around, is related to peri in words such as periphery, i.e. the boundary or area around something. And perhaps not as helpful because not as common a word, apa, meaning away, is related to apo in words such as apogee or apostle. Apogee is the point furthest away from Earth that any planet in our solar system can take. So, for example, when Mars in its orbit is on the other side of the Sun, that might be its apogee, its point furthest away from Earth. Whereas an apostle is literally someone who is sent away or sent out to spread news and so on. So apa related to apo in words such as apogee and apostle. Mainly, however, it's important that you're able to just recognize the preverbs and split them up from each other and from the basic verb form, because that is what allows you to identify the verb that they've been added to, and if you can do that, that will go a long way towards translating the compound verb form as a whole. That was it for this chapter. We hope that you found this video helpful. And if you have any comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you. Please do write to us at rupal@cambridge-sanskrit.org. And now, for your own work on this material, good luck and have fun!